Camilla struck a royal guard and learned what happens when royal duty is crossed. Emotional stories. Camilla had always dreamed of visiting London. From the moment she had first seen pictures of the city, with its grand old buildings, the bustling streets, and the iconic landmarks, she had imagined herself walking through it all, camera in hand, ready to capture memories she would cherish forever. She had saved for months, planned every little detail, and even practiced her English to make sure she could navigate the city easily. Nothing could have prepared her for the excitement she felt as she finally stepped off the train and saw the London skyline with its mix of history and modernity. On her second day in the city, she decided to visit Buckingham Palace. She had seen countless photos of it, and the idea of standing in front of the palace gates, watching the famous guards in their bright red uniforms and tall bearskin hats, filled her with anticipation. She joined the growing crowd of tourists, all craning their necks to get the best view. Children were laughing and running around, couples were taking selfies, and street performers were entertaining small groups nearby. The atmosphere was lively, almost electric, but Camilla's attention was fixed on the guards. She watched them carefully. They stood perfectly still, their faces unreadable, as if they were statues brought to life. Every so often, one would slowly turn, march a few steps, then return to his post. Tourists whispered among themselves about the strict rules the guards had to follow. Camilla was fascinated. She thought about how much discipline and dedication it must take to hold such a position. She felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. "I want to get a good photo," she thought, "something that will show just how serious and impressive they are." Camilla slowly edged her way closer to the front, trying not to block anyone's view. People were shifting and pushing, trying to get their cameras in position. She had her phone ready, her fingers hovering over the camera button. She wanted a picture that would capture the perfection of the guards, their uniforms, and the palace gates behind them. Her heart was racing. She could feel the excitement in the air, the kind that makes even the coldest, busiest city street feel alive. As she moved, she didn't notice a small step in front of her. She stumbled slightly, catching herself at the last second, but in the process, she accidentally bumped into one of the guards. At first, she thought nothing of it. The guard didn't react, his face as calm as ever. Good, she thought, relieved. He didn't notice. She stepped back slightly and smiled awkwardly at him, expecting him to give her a small nod or a glance. Instead, he remained completely still, as though he had not even been touched. The crowd around her didn't seem to notice the small collision either. Everyone was too busy trying to take photos and videos of the ceremony. Camilla laughed softly to herself, feeling a little embarrassed. She muttered an apology under her breath, thinking that the guard probably couldn't hear her anyway. She adjusted her bag, trying to move a little closer to get the perfect angle for her photo. She didn't want to miss the moment when the guard would march again. Then, in a split second, something unexpected happened. Another tourist who was standing very close to her accidentally jostled her shoulder. Camilla instinctively turned to push them away, trying to keep her balance, and in the chaos, her hand brushed against the guard again. This time, her movement was a little stronger than intended, and the guard felt the impact. Camilla froze immediately. Her stomach tightened, and she felt a rush of panic. She had only wanted to take a photo. She hadn't meant to touch him, much less strike him. The guard, as always, remained perfectly still. But this time, Camilla could feel the tension in the air. Tourists nearby stopped talking and turned to look. Some whispered to each other, pointing subtly at her. Camilla's face burned with shame. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground and be invisible. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Her heart was racing, and her hands were trembling slightly as she lowered her camera. She realized that this was not just any person she had bumped into. It was a royal guard, a living symbol of centuries-old tradition and duty. For a moment, Camilla stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Should she apologize again? Would he even accept it? The thought of having broken some unspoken rule made her feel small and foolish. She had always considered herself careful and respectful, but in that instant, she realized how easily accidents could happen, even when she meant no harm. The guard's calm, unwavering expression made her feel even more guilty. He did not react, but the weight of his presence made her heart pound faster. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Around her, the crowd continued to murmur quietly. Some people were filming the guards, some were whispering about Camilla, and a few older tourists shook their heads in disapproval. Camilla wished she could explain herself, but she knew that her words might not matter. The rules here were different, the expectations higher. Every guard she had seen had trained for years to remain composed, to never react even in the most challenging situations. And here she was, an ordinary visitor, unintentionally causing a disturbance. Camilla's mind raced. She thought about what she had learned about the guards before coming to London. They were trained to hold their position no matter what happened around them. They could not show emotion, they could not respond to distractions, and they had to maintain perfect discipline at all times. And she, without even realizing it, had crossed that line. She felt a pang of guilt that went deeper than embarrassment. It was a sense of having violated something sacred, a tradition that had been maintained for centuries. Her fingers tightened around her camera as she tried to compose herself. She reminded herself that it was an accident, that she had not meant to harm anyone. But the thought that she had struck a royal guard, even unintentionally, filled her with a mixture of fear and awe. Camilla had always known that visiting Buckingham Palace would be special, but she had never imagined it would be so intense. She glanced at the guard again. His expression was unreadable as always, but she could sense the discipline in every inch of his posture. He was a reminder of the seriousness of the place, the history that surrounded it, and the responsibilities he carried. As the guard continued to stand perfectly still, Camilla realized something important. This moment, as frightening as it felt, was also a lesson. It was a lesson in respect, in awareness, and in understanding that actions, even small ones, could have consequences she had never considered. She could feel the weight of the centuries of tradition pressing down on her in that instant, and it made her pause, reflect, and reconsider her behavior. She wanted to make amends, but she knew that she had to do it the right way. Camilla took another step back, trying to give the guard space. She whispered another apology under her breath, hoping that it would be enough. She looked around at the crowd, at the families, the children, the other tourists, and she felt a sense of humility. She realized that this was not just a personal mistake. It was a reminder of how important it was to be mindful of others, especially in a place where every action was observed and every rule mattered. For the next few minutes, she stood quietly, observing the guards and the palace gates. She tried to calm her racing heart and remind herself that the situation was not catastrophic. She was safe. No one was angry with her, and the guard had not reacted. But the experience had left a mark on her. She felt more aware, more respectful, and more grateful for the opportunity to witness something so historic and disciplined. She knew that this story would stay with her forever, not as a shameful moment, but as a lesson in humility and awareness. By the time the next shift of guards began to march, Camilla had regained some composure. She took a few photos, careful this time to keep her distance. She smiled politely at the guard, who continued to perform his duties without change. As she walked away, she felt a mixture of relief and reflection. She had learned in the most unexpected way that even the smallest actions could have significance, especially when they crossed into realms of history, tradition, and duty. Camilla left the palace grounds that day with more than just photographs. She left with a story, a lesson, and a memory that would remain with her for the rest of her life. She had come to see history, but she had experienced it in a way that was intensely personal, emotional, and unforgettable. And as she walked back through the busy streets of London, she promised herself that she would never forget the importance of respect, mindfulness, and the power of small actions. After the incident at Buckingham Palace, Camilla walked through the crowded streets, her heart still pounding. The excitement she had felt earlier that morning had been replaced by a strange mix of anxiety and regret. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, her hand brushing against the royal guard, the sudden awareness that she had struck someone who represented centuries of tradition, and the quiet, unwavering gaze of the guard himself. The crowd around her moved on, laughing and talking as if nothing had happened, but for Camilla, everything had changed. She found a small bench near a park across the street and sat down, trying to calm herself. The people walking by didn't notice her distress. They were busy with their own plans and their own tour. But Camilla felt as if all eyes were on her. Every detail of the encounter kept coming back. The precise way the guard had stood, the discipline in his posture, and the fact that he had not reacted at all. She realized that what she had done was more serious than she had first thought. This wasn't a simple collision on a crowded street. She had, even unintentionally, challenged the decorum of a place steeped in history. Her mind wandered as she thought about the role of a royal guard. These men and women were trained to protect not just the palace, but the symbol of a nation's history and its traditions. Their duty was more than just standing still or marching in formation. It was a commitment that required years of training, strict discipline, and an unwavering sense of responsibility. Camilla had only wanted a photograph, a souvenir of her trip, but in that small moment of carelessness, she had overlooked the weight of that duty. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her, stronger than any she had felt in her life. She tried to rationalize what had happened, telling herself that it had been an accident, that she hadn't meant to touch him, let alone strike him. But the more she thought about it, the less comforting those words felt. She knew accidents could still have consequences, and this was not a place where small mistakes went unnoticed. Camilla remembered the whispers from other tourists, the subtle pointing and the quick glances of disapproval. She realized that even if the guard had not reacted outwardly, the rules he represented had been crossed. As she sat there, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about Buckingham Palace. Curiosity and dread made her open it. She froze when she read the headline, "Tourist Incident with Royal Guard Causes Stir Among Visitors." The article described a minor collision between a tourist and one of the palace guards, emphasizing the importance of respecting the guards and the strict rules they followed. Camilla's stomach turned. Even though the incident was described as minor, it had already become part of a public story. She felt exposed, as if the entire city now knew what she had done. Her thoughts returned to the guard. She thought about the discipline it must take to remain calm in the face of disturbances. How many times had he endured pushing, shoving, or unintentional bumps from crowds of visitors? How many hours had he stood in the cold, in the sun, without complaint? Camilla felt a deep respect for the dedication required to hold such a position, and at the same time, a sharp pang of remorse for having disrupted it, even for a fleeting moment. The weight of the situation pressed on her as she imagined the possible consequences. What if she were reprimanded formally? What if she were banned from the palace or even fined? Though she knew she had not intended harm, she could not ignore the fact that the rules existed for a reason, and she had unintentionally broken one of the most sacred ones. Camilla's mind raced with what-ifs, each scenario more anxiety-inducing than the last. She felt trapped between regret and fear, unsure of what to do next. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a friend back home who had seen her posts about Buckingham Palace. "How was the visit?" the message read cheerfully. Camilla stared at the screen, feeling a surge of guilt. She wanted to tell them the truth, to explain what had happened, but she couldn't find the right words. How could she summarize an experience that had shifted her understanding of respect, tradition, and responsibility so profoundly? She typed a short, vague reply and put the phone down. She needed time to think, to process, and to come to terms with what she had done. Camilla spent the rest of the morning wandering the streets near the palace, trying to distract herself with shops, cafes, and street performances. But no matter where she went, the incident lingered in her mind. Every corner of London seemed to remind her of the palace, the guards, and the moment she had struck one of them. She realized that this was not just a story about an accident. It was a story about awareness, mindfulness, and the consequences of actions, however unintentional they might be. By lunchtime, Camilla decided she needed guidance. She found a small travel information center and approached the staff, explaining in a quiet voice what had happened. The staff listened carefully, nodding, and then explained that the palace authorities would likely review the incident. They emphasized the importance of showing respect and following instructions if contacted. Camilla felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that she was taking the right steps, fear of the unknown consequences. As she left the center, Camilla reflected on the people she had seen at the palace that morning. Children had been laughing, couples had been taking selfies, and tourists had been bustling around without a care. She realized that she had been caught up in the excitement, in her desire to capture a perfect moment, and in that moment of distraction, she had lost sight of respect. It was a painful but necessary realization. Sometimes, even small moments of carelessness could have a far-reaching impact. Her mind also turned to the royal guard himself. She wondered about his day, his training, and the sacrifices he made to perform his duty. Did he feel frustrated or annoyed by the incident? Or was he used to such occurrences, having learned to remain calm in the face of chaos? The thought humbled her. Here was someone who dedicated himself to a greater purpose, someone who maintained discipline despite disruptions, and she had inadvertently challenged that. Camilla spent the afternoon walking along the river, trying to clear her mind. She watched the boats glide past, listened to the sound of water lapping against the banks, and tried to breathe deeply. Slowly, she began to accept that this experience, as uncomfortable as it was a lesson she needed to learn. It was teaching her about accountability, the importance of awareness, and the consequences of even unintentional actions. For the first time that day, she felt a small sense of clarity. As evening approached, Camilla returned to her hotel room. She sat by the window looking out at the city lights. London felt different now, more alive and more serious. The palace, the guards, the rules, everything seemed to carry a weight she had not understood before. She realized that respect was not just about following rules. It was about understanding the meaning behind them. She promised herself that she would take this lesson to heart, not only in her travels but in her life as a whole. Before going to bed, she wrote in her journal. She described the morning, her thoughts, her fear, and her growing respect for the guards. She wrote about the lesson she had learned and how it had changed her perspective. For Camilla, writing became a way to process the emotions she had felt, and to ensure that she remembered this experience not as a moment of shame, but as a moment of growth. As she drifted off to sleep, Camilla knew that the incident at Buckingham Palace would stay with her forever. She had come to London hoping for adventure and memories, but she had received something far more valuable, a deep understanding of responsibility, respect, and the impact of one's actions. She had realized that even the smallest gestures could carry weight, and that mindfulness and care were essential in every interaction, especially in places steeped in tradition and history. The next morning, Camilla woke with a nervous flutter in her chest. The memory of the previous day at Buckingham Palace weighed on her mind like a stone. She had tried to sleep, to distract herself, and even to convince herself that the incident had been minor, but deep down, she knew she could not ignore it. The collision with the guard had been more than just a small mistake. It was a breach of protocol in a place that demanded respect and discipline. Today, she decided, she would face whatever consequences awaited her. She dressed carefully, choosing simple, modest clothing, and walked to the palace with a sense of trepidation. The streets seemed quieter than the day before, but every step she took felt heavier than usual. Tourists laughed and chatted around her, but Camilla felt as if she were moving through a different world, one in which every glance and every movement mattered. Her stomach twisted with nerves. She had no idea what to expect. Would she be reprimanded? Would she be asked to leave London? Or worse, would she be treated with anger or harshness for her mistake? As she approached the palace gates, the familiar sight of the guards brought back memories of her stumble, her accidental strike, and the disciplined, calm figure who had stood before her without flinching. Her heart raced. She was led to a small office near the entrance by a staff member who had recognized her from the incident. The office was formal, quiet, and serious, filled with polished wooden furniture, high ceilings, and the faint smell of old paper. Everything about the room reminded her that she was no longer a casual visitor, but someone under scrutiny. Camilla was asked to sit, and she did so hesitantly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. A palace officer entered, a middle-aged man with a calm yet authoritative presence. He introduced himself and explained that the purpose of the meeting was to review the incident from the previous day. Camilla nodded nervously, feeling the weight of every word. The officer's voice was measured, neither harsh nor forgiving, but filled with the authority of someone accustomed to upholding centuries of tradition. She was asked to recount the events as she remembered them. Camilla spoke quietly, carefully choosing her words. She described how she had been trying to take photographs, how she had accidentally stumbled, and how she had unintentionally brushed against the guard. She emphasized that it had been unintentional, that she had no desire to disrupt or disrespect anyone, and that she felt deeply sorry for what had happened. Her voice shook slightly, betraying the anxiety she had worked so hard to control. The officer listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he asked a few questions, clarifying details and ensuring that he understood the exact nature of the incident. Camilla answered honestly, hoping that sincerity would be enough. She could feel the eyes of the palace, the weight of history and duty pressing down on her. Every word, every gesture seemed to matter more here than anywhere else she had ever been. It was an intimidating experience, one that filled her with both fear and awe. After what felt like an eternity, the officer spoke again, explaining that while the incident was serious, the guard had shown remarkable discipline and had not been harmed in any way. He emphasized that the palace valued respect for tradition and for the people who upheld it. Camilla listened intently, realizing that the rules were not just arbitrary. They existed to preserve history, dignity, and the trust of those who served. She felt a deep sense of relief, tempered by continued shame. She had been fortunate that the situation had not escalated further. Then the officer motioned toward the door. "You may apologize to the guard directly," he said. Camilla's heart skipped a beat. She had imagined many outcomes, but none had included this moment, facing the very person she had accidentally struck. She nodded and followed him down a quiet corridor, her hands trembling. The walls were lined with portraits of past monarchs, and she felt the presence of history watching her. She tried to steady her breath, reminding herself that she had nothing but sincerity to offer. As they entered a small room, the guard was there, standing perfectly still as always. But this time, Camilla noticed something different. While his posture remained disciplined, his eyes held a quiet curiosity. He had been briefed on the incident, and now it was time for her to speak. Camilla swallowed hard, her throat dry, and spoke softly. "I am very sorry," she said. "I did not mean to touch you, and I certainly did not mean to show any disrespect." It was completely unintentional, and I feel terrible for what happened." The guard remained calm, his expression unreadable. He listened carefully, as if weighing her words. Camilla felt a surge of emotion, nervousness, shame, and a desperate hope that he would understand her sincerity. She continued, explaining how she had been caught up in the excitement, how she had not realized the weight of the moment, and how she now understood the importance of the rules and the duty he performed every day. For several long moments, there was silence. Camilla's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She could hear the faint sounds of the city outside, the distant chatter of tourists, and yet inside the room time seemed to stand still. Finally, the guard spoke, his voice calm and even. "I understand," he said simply. "Accidents happen. What matters is that you recognize the seriousness of your actions and show respect for the duties and traditions of this place." Camilla felt a wave of relief and gratitude. She nodded quickly, barely able to speak, overwhelmed by the depth of his understanding. In that moment, she realized that this man, who had remained silent and still for hours on end, had shown a quiet strength and fairness that she had never encountered before. He had upheld his duty, maintained his discipline, and yet he had also allowed space for human error, for learning and growth. It was a lesson she would never forget. The officer then explained that no formal punishment would be necessary, but that this encounter should serve as a reminder to all visitors about the importance of awareness and respect. Camilla listened carefully, committing every word to memory. She realized that she had been given a rare opportunity to learn directly from someone who embodied centuries of tradition and discipline. The experience was humbling, and she felt a renewed sense of responsibility. As she left the room, Camilla's legs felt unsteady. She had entered feeling anxious and fearful, but she was leaving with a profound sense of understanding. The palace, the guards, and the rules were no longer abstract concepts. They were living lessons in discipline, respect, and human dignity. She thought about the people she would tell this story to, and she realized that it would not be a tale of embarrassment, but a story of growth, humility, and the power of accountability. On her way back through the palace grounds, Camilla took a moment to observe the other guards. They stood as they always did, calm and composed, seemingly unaffected by the hustle and bustle around them. But now, she saw them differently. She saw the discipline it took to maintain that composure, the commitment to duty that went beyond personal comfort or convenience. Every step, every motion, and every silent moment carried meaning. She felt honored to have witnessed it up close and humbled to have learned a lesson from someone who exemplified such dedication. As she left the palace gates, Camilla felt the weight of the morning's events settle into a quiet, reflective calm. She understood that mistakes, even small ones, could teach profound lessons. She realized that respect was not only about words and gestures, but about awareness, mindfulness, and an understanding of history and tradition. Her encounter with the guard had transformed her perspective, giving her a new appreciation for the balance between human error and responsibility, between excitement and respect. Back at her hotel, Camilla sat by the window once again, this time with a notebook in hand. She wrote down everything she had experienced: the fear, the nervous anticipation, the conversation with the officer, and the moment she had apologized to the guard. She reflected on the lessons she had learned, the importance of being mindful in every interaction, the value of understanding the meaning behind rules, and the humility that comes from recognizing one's mistakes. Writing it all down helped her process the emotions and solidify the growth she had experienced. By evening, Camilla felt a sense of peace she had not known the day before. The city lights of London twinkled outside her window, but they no longer seemed chaotic or intimidating. Instead, they felt like a backdrop to a day that had changed her, a day that had taught her more than she could have ever imagined about respect, responsibility, and human connection. She knew that this story, this experience would remain with her forever, not as a moment of shame, but as a turning point in her understanding of life and tradition. Camilla finally closed her notebook, feeling a quiet gratitude. She had come to London seeking adventure and memories, but she had left with wisdom and insight. The incident with the guard, which had initially filled her with fear and guilt, had become one of the most meaningful experiences of her life. She realized that true learning often comes from unexpected moments, from mistakes and their consequences, and from the courage to face them with honesty and humility. The morning after her encounter with the palace officer and the royal guard, Camilla woke slowly, feeling a mixture of calm and reflection. For the first time since the incident, she didn't feel the tight knot of fear in her stomach. Instead, there was a quiet awareness, a sense that something significant had shifted inside her. She got out of bed and walked to the window of her hotel room. The streets of London were alive with the usual morning bustle, red double-decker buses, pedestrians hurrying along, and cyclists weaving through traffic. But Camilla saw it all differently now. Each movement, each action, seemed more meaningful, more deliberate. She sat at the small table by the window, opening her notebook once again. Her pen hovered above the page, and she realized she had more to write than she had ever imagined. She wrote about the previous day, recounting each detail: the excitement, the collision, the panic, and the weight of realizing she had struck someone whose duty was sacred. She wrote about the officer's measured words, the guard's calm acceptance, and the deep respect she now felt for their roles. As she wrote, she began to understand the full significance of the experience. Camilla thought about the concept of duty. Before this trip, she had admired discipline in general but had never fully understood it. Seeing the guards in action, especially during that brief, intense incident, gave her a new appreciation for what it meant to commit oneself fully to a responsibility. The guards did not act for recognition or reward. They acted because their role demanded integrity, focus, and respect. It was a level of dedication that Camilla had never personally experienced. She realized that her accidental strike, though minor, had disrupted a system that depended on exacting attention and unwavering calm. That realization humbled her deeply. She remembered the moment she had apologized to the guard. The fear and tension of facing him had been almost unbearable. Her heart had pounded in her chest, her hands had trembled, and she had felt as if every eye in the palace were upon her. And yet, when he accepted her apology calmly and without judgment, she experienced a profound relief. It was as if she had been given a second chance, a rare opportunity to learn directly from someone who embodied discipline, respect, and patience. In that quiet exchange, Camilla realized that the way people respond to mistakes can teach just as much as the rules themselves. As she sipped her tea, Camilla reflected on her own behavior. She realized that in her excitement and desire for the perfect photograph, she had allowed impatience and distraction to take over. Her mind had been focused only on herself, on capturing a memory, and in that focus, she had overlooked the people around her and the context in which she was acting. It was a humbling thought. She understood, for the first time so vividly, how important mindfulness was, not just in places like Buckingham Palace, but in everyday life. Every action, even one as small as a gesture or a step, carries consequences. The day passed slowly, but Camilla felt a new energy in her reflections. She revisited the streets she had walked the day before, this time observing instead of rushing. She watched families, students, and workers go about their routines. She noticed small acts of kindness. A man helping an elderly woman cross the street, children sharing snacks, a busker giving free music lessons to eager listeners. She saw that every action, whether big or small, had an impact on those around us. Her mind returned to the palace, and she realized that the lesson she had learned there was not confined to guards or traditions. It was universal. Camilla thought about respect, not as a formal or rigid concept, but as a living, breathing practice. The palace rules, the guards' discipline, and the expectations for visitors were all part of a larger framework designed to preserve dignity and order. She reflected on how she could apply this understanding to her own life. Respect for others, attention to consequences, and awareness of one's actions could transform ordinary interactions into meaningful ones. It was not enough to feel regret or guilt. It was necessary to internalize the lessons and let them guide future behavior. Later in the afternoon, Camilla visited a quiet park. She found a bench under a large oak tree and sat, letting her thoughts settle. She remembered how nervous she had been when first recounting the incident to the officer and guard. That fear had forced her to confront her mistake honestly and openly. She realized that accountability, though uncomfortable, was a powerful tool for personal growth. By facing her actions and accepting responsibility, she had gained clarity, self-awareness, and emotional strength. It was a lesson she knew she would carry with her forever. As she watched children playing nearby, Camilla reflected on the idea of human imperfection. Everyone makes mistakes, she thought. Everyone has moments when their actions are not perfect, when they unintentionally disrupt the lives or work of others. What matters, however, is how we respond to those mistakes. Do we ignore them, excuse them, or take them seriously and learn from them? Camilla understood now that mistakes were opportunities for growth. The incident with the guard, frightening as it had been, had taught her lessons that no textbook or travel guide ever could. The evening brought a gentle calm over the city. Camilla returned to her hotel room and looked at herself in the mirror. She saw a mixture of emotions reflected back: relief, humility, gratitude, and a newfound sense of responsibility. She thought about her journey, both literal and emotional. She had come to London seeking adventure, photographs, and memories, but she had received something far more profound: a deep understanding of duty, respect, and the impact of one's actions. Her perspective had shifted. She no longer saw rules as obstacles. She saw them as guiding principles that preserved order, tradition, and human dignity. Camilla spent the rest of the evening writing letters in her notebook, not to anyone specific, but as a way to process her thoughts. She wrote to the guard in her mind, thanking him for his patience and composure. She wrote to herself, acknowledging the fear and guilt she had felt, and committing to carrying the lessons forward. And she wrote to the world, in a sense, reflecting on how small actions can ripple far beyond their immediate context. Writing became a form of meditation, helping her internalize the lessons she had learned, and ensuring that the growth she had experienced would not fade with time. She realized that the incident had also deepened her empathy. Before this experience, she had admired discipline and responsibility from a distance. Now, she understood them from a personal perspective. She could imagine the hours of training the guards endured, the vigilance they maintained, and the composure they held even in the face of disturbances. This empathy extended beyond guards and palace staff. It was a reminder to appreciate the effort, care, and commitment that others bring to every aspect of their lives. Camilla felt grateful for the chance to see the world through this lens. By the end of the night, Camilla felt a quiet strength within herself. She had confronted fear, faced the consequences of a mistake, and emerged with insight, humility, and emotional maturity. The incident with the guard had been transformative, turning what could have been a moment of shame into a life lesson of lasting value. She understood that true growth often comes from discomfort, reflection, and the courage to face oneself honestly. For the first time in days, she felt peaceful, knowing that she had learned something meaningful and profound. Before sleeping, Camilla closed her notebook and reflected one last time. She understood that respect, mindfulness, and accountability were not just lessons for visitors at Buckingham Palace. They were lessons for life. Every day, in every interaction, There was an opportunity to act with thoughtfulness and integrity, to make choices that honored both oneself and others. The experience had changed her perception of herself and the world around her. She felt a deep gratitude for the opportunity to grow, and for the wisdom that had come from such an unexpected source. As she drifted into sleep, Camilla dreamed not of tourists and palace gates, but of moments where respect and awareness shaped the world in subtle but powerful ways. She understood now that her journey was not just about sightseeing or photographs. It was about learning, reflection, and transformation. And she knew, with certainty, that the lessons she had learned would stay with her for a lifetime. Camilla woke early on the last morning of her trip, the soft light of London spilling into her hotel room. The city, which had seemed so overwhelming and fast-paced when she first arrived, now felt familiar and almost intimate. She gazed out the window at the streets below, watching the pedestrians and cyclists go about their routines, and she noticed small details she had overlooked before. The careful way a baker arranged pastries in a display, the way a street musician's fingers danced lightly across, the strings of a guitar, the soft conversations shared between neighbors walking together. These simple acts seemed to carry a quiet dignity, a reflection of the same discipline and care she had witnessed at Buckingham Palace. The incident with the royal guard no longer weighed on her as a burden, though it had left an indelible mark on her memory. It had been a moment of fear and regret at first, but now, in reflection, it had become one of the most valuable experiences of her life. She understood that mistakes, even unintentional ones, could teach profound lessons if faced honestly and with humility. Her encounter had transformed her perspective not only on respect and discipline, but also on life itself. Camilla packed her belongings slowly, savoring the last few hours in the city. Every item she placed in her suitcase seemed to carry memories of her journey, from the tickets of places she had visited to the small souvenirs that reminded her of the lessons she had learned. She paused for a moment, holding a small notebook she had been using to record her reflections. It had grown thick over the week, filled with her thoughts, feelings, and observations. She realized how much personal growth she had experienced, and a wave of gratitude washed over her. Before checking out of the hotel, Camilla decided to take one last walk through the nearby streets. She moved slowly, noticing the architecture, the faces of the people she passed, and the rhythm of the city around her. It struck her how connected everything seemed, how each action, no matter how small, had the potential to affect others. She thought again of the guard and the officer at Buckingham Palace, and she smiled softly to herself, remembering the lessons they had imparted without needing to lecture or scold. Their composure, patience, and fairness had taught her more than any guidebook or travel blog could. As she approached Buckingham Palace one final time, Camilla felt a mixture of emotions. The excitement she had felt on her first visit had been replaced by reverence and understanding. She stood quietly at a distance, observing the guards as they moved in precise, deliberate steps. Their movements were calm, disciplined, and deliberate, each one a reflection of years of training and dedication. She thought about the commitment it must take to maintain such focus, and she felt a deep respect for the role they played, not just in protecting the palace, but in preserving centuries of history and tradition. A small crowd of tourists had gathered, capturing photographs and whispering excitedly. Camilla noticed how many were distracted by the perfect angles, the timing of the march, or the grandeur of the palace gates. She smiled inwardly, understanding how easy it was to become caught up in the spectacle and forget the human element behind it. She remembered her own mistake, the accidental strike, the panic, and the realization that she had disrupted the quiet order of this historic place. And now she realized how important it was to approach every situation with mindfulness and care. As she walked along the palace grounds, Camilla reflected on the lessons she had learned beyond the boundaries of Buckingham Palace. Respect, she realized, was not limited to formal traditions or historic settings. It applied to all areas of life. Being aware of the people around her, understanding the impact of her actions, and approaching interactions with sincerity and humility were lessons she could carry into her daily life. She thought about her family, her friends, and even strangers she encountered in the future. Every interaction was an opportunity to act thoughtfully and respectfully. Camilla paused near a small flower bed, the delicate blooms swaying gently in the breeze. She thought about her journey as a whole. She had come to London with the simple goal of sightseeing and creating memories, but she was leaving with something far deeper: self-awareness, empathy, and a newfound understanding of responsibility. She realized that growth often comes unexpectedly, through challenges, mistakes, and moments that push us out of our comfort zones. Her encounter with the guard had been one of those moments, a brief, intense experience that left a lasting impact. She remembered the calm voice of the officer who had listened to her recount the incident. He had asked questions, clarified details, and treated her with fairness, reminding her that accountability could be approached without harshness or judgment. And she remembered the guard, standing silently yet profoundly, embodying patience, discipline, and understanding. Both had taught her that mistakes did not define a person. It was how one responded to them that truly mattered. She felt a quiet determination to carry these lessons forward in her own life. Walking back through the streets, Camilla reflected on how her perspective had shifted. Before this trip, she often focused on the immediate, on capturing moments for herself, and on seeking excitement without fully considering the broader impact of her actions. Now, she understood the value of pausing, observing, and acting with care. She realized that mindfulness and respect were not limitations, but pathways to deeper understanding and meaningful experiences. Even small gestures, she thought, could make a profound difference in the lives of others. As she returned to her hotel to collect her luggage, Camilla felt a sense of closure. She had faced the consequences of her mistake, apologized sincerely, and reflected deeply on the lessons she had learned. The fear and guilt that had haunted her initially had transformed into insight, empathy, and personal growth. She understood that the true value of her journey was not in the photos she had taken or the souvenirs she had collected, but in the transformation that had occurred within herself. Camilla hailed a taxi to take her to the train station, the cityscape of London passing by in a blur of colors and shapes. She watched as people moved through their daily routines, each carrying their own stories, challenges, and lessons. She thought about how easily moments of learning and growth could be found if one approached life with awareness and humility. Her encounter with the guard, a brief moment of tension and fear, had opened her eyes to a world of understanding that extended far beyond the palace gates. At the train station, as she waited for her departure, Camilla reflected on the journey ahead. She knew that she would return home with stories to tell, but this story would be different from the usual travel tales. It was not just a story about visiting a famous landmark or witnessing a ceremonial display. It was a story of personal growth, humility, and the profound impact of understanding and respecting the responsibilities of others. She realized that life itself was filled with lessons, waiting to be discovered in unexpected moments. Before boarding the train, Camilla took one last look at the city she had come to love and respect. London had given her much more than sightseeing opportunities. It had given her wisdom, perspective, and a chance to grow as a person. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the beauty of the city and the experiences she had enjoyed, but for the challenges and lessons that had shaped her understanding of responsibility and respect. She knew that she would carry these insights with her wherever she went, applying them to her relationships, her actions, and her decisions in daily life. As the train departed, Camilla gazed out the window, watching the city gradually fade into the distance. She thought about the royal guard, the officer, and the lessons she had learned at Buckingham Palace. She realized that true understanding and growth often come from moments of discomfort, challenge, and reflection. Mistakes, she understood, were not simply errors to be feared or avoided. They were opportunities to learn, to empathize, and to grow. She felt a quiet pride in having faced her mistake honestly, and a deep commitment to carry the lessons forward. By the time the train rolled through the countryside, Camilla felt a sense of peace and clarity she had never experienced before. She understood now that life's lessons were not always found in textbooks, lectures, or carefully planned experiences. They were often discovered in unexpected, intense moments that demanded reflection, honesty, and courage. Her journey to London had begun as a simple adventure, but it had become a transformative experience that would shape her for years to come. As the sun set over the rolling hills outside the train window, Camilla closed her eyes and reflected on her journey. She understood that every interaction, every choice, and every action carried weight. She had learned to approach life with mindfulness, respect, and humility. The accidental strike at Buckingham Palace, once a source of fear and embarrassment, had become a catalyst for growth, empathy, and insight. She knew she would carry this experience with her forever, not as a memory of shame, but as a lesson in responsibility, awareness, and the power of sincere reflection.